Here's James Langford today. There's a social media, national media persona of who Kash is. And then there's who he actually is. There's this cartoon of him that's out there, that he's mean, hateful, intense. And then when you meet him, you think, where is that person that's being described? I don't know, James. Have you ever watched a show about a bad guy? I don't know. Maybe Tony Soprano can be pretty charming. Hello and welcome to the Bulwark podcast. I'm your host, Tim Miller. We have a massive day today. The Kash, Patel, and Tulsi Gabbard hearings are happening as we speak, as is a press avail that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are having about the tragic plane crash in Washington. So we'll get to some of that. For Bulwark Plus subscribers, we'll do a full wrap-up at the end of the day. That link will be in your inbox, or you can go to bulwark.com/subscribe if you're not a member yet. I don't know why that would be. And, of course, I'll be back tomorrow for a recap. But for today, we've got the co-founder of Crooked Media, co-host of it's something called Pod Save America. Mm-hmm. He also has another podcast I like called Pod Save the World. He was a national security staff spokesman during the Obama administration. It's the man Ben Shapiro calls Tehran Tommy, Tommy Vietor. How you doing?
You know, I'm good, buddy. It's great to see you. Actually, I think in like 2018, I emailed Ben because I used to call him Baby Bannon, which honestly was kind of unfair because I think he left the Bannon world. And so we agreed to not be quite as mean to each other online, but I never actually met Ben, so I should probably do that someday.
Yeah, I don't know. I listened to his podcast for the first time in a while yesterday, and it is unlistenable. And the fact that he beats us in the ratings sometimes is, well, me always, but you sometimes should really make you have to reflect on some things.
How do you do a show without someone to talk to? I don't get it. It's just a monologue.
Yeah, it's just monotone. What did Sarah call him? A castrated chipmunk? It's just like a castrated chipmunk giving you a 50-minute lecture in the same tone. It's an interesting podcast.
Fun guy.
Okay, to each their own, right? Everybody, people like different things, different strokes for different folks. All right. So as I mentioned, there was a just horrific mid-air collision last night outside of Reagan National, DCA. There were no survivors. The collision was between a passenger jet coming in from Wichita and an Army helicopter. As we're coming on here, I believe still happening in the Brady briefing room is Donald Trump and J.D. Vance talking about this. I want to play one clip from the president talking about what he thinks was the reason that this crash happened.
They put a big push to put diversity into the FAA's program. Then another article, the Federal Aviation Administration, this was before I got to office, recently, second term. The FAA is actively recruiting workers who suffer severe intellectual disabilities, psychiatric problems, and other mental and physical conditions under a diversity and inclusion hiring initiative spelled out on the agency's website. Can you imagine?
So I guess it's black people and the people with mental health problems that caused this. He went on to say that Pete Buttigieg was a disaster who's just got a good line of bullshit. And then he followed up that by saying, now we mourn and we pray. So thoughts on the president's reaction to this tragedy?
I mean, I have two sort of buckets of thoughts, Tim. I mean, the idea of blaming this crash on DEI before there's an investigation and then handing the mic to a real-world Boston castmate turned Fox News host turned transportation secretary, Sean Duffy, who then hands the mic over to Fox News weekend anchor turned Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth is a lot. It's a lot for me to.
You don't feel like that was a meritocracy there, having two reality show stars and one weekend host being able to like point people for responding to this? You don't think that reflects? And they are all white males, so I mean they had to overcome the obstacles of the DEI to get to the job.
They did. They succeeded somehow in spite of all the obstacles in front of them. So that was one bucket of frustration. And then Tim, I just started to think about like, what would Obama have done? What would George Bush have done? What would Reagan have done in a moment like this? I think you go out and give a speech that's thoughtful and that is about the victims and mourning and this sort of like collective wound that the nation is experiencing because of this tragedy. I don't think any president in history would go out and do like a freewheeling press conference, even if they did have command of the facts. But it's just, this is like the Trump era, right? Like it used to be you didn't want to own bad stories or disasters, and now he's just puts himself in the middle of everything. And it's an interesting, I guess it's just how communications is now.
I mean, not really. I mean, it's how communications is for Trump, I guess.
Not for Biden, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, that's another challenge.
But maybe there's value to this, right? You are commanding, like you're owning every story. You have the attention on you at all times. Like it goes against my instincts, but I'm wondering, I don't know. Is this
maybe
the right
there's
instinct?
political value. I don't know, but just like from a human standpoint, it's just so atrocious. There are people that. Many people that lost loved ones. I saw an interview last night with a local news. There's a guy waiting for his wife, hoping that she survived. Obviously, she didn't survive. I assume that there were people there who are, not white, who are minorities, who have mental health issues in their family. Like, do they really want to see the president the next day? Talking about his speculation that maybe it was a black lady that was in the cockpit. I just don't get that.
Yeah, no, the substance is atrocious, and that is unequivocal. There's a stylistic and sort of process point that was interesting to me that I guess what we're going to be living with for the next 4 years.
Yeah, no, obviously it's atrocious. I don't even like, what is the point? He's also not running again, I guess. You know what I mean? So it's like, what is even the political point, right? Like this is the one sort of element of all of this. Like you would think that, he also had a written statement. It was classic Trump that's talking about uniting the country.
Mm-hmm.
That was put
mails
there.
that in. Yeah.
But like, we don't even really know what happened. Like it was actually, I saw this kind of right wing pilot of somebody that had been a pilot of a Black Hawk helicopter. That was the helicopter that crashed into the passenger plane. And, dude just like gave a very detailed list of all the things that could go wrong and how it's more challenging than you think and how there's a watch person. There's two, right? Like we know nothing, and so to go to pop off on that is pretty ridiculous. But I do think like it is Trump, but as you're saying about just kind of how things are right now, at some level, it reflects a little bit of a just kind of breakdown of our entire society that also is maybe Trump's fault. But, I saw some of our YouTube competitors out there yesterday that were blaming it on the fact that the FAA administrator got fired already and we didn't have a replaced FAA administrator, and that saying that it's Trump's fault. Democratic Congressman woman Norma Torres said that the families deserve answers because Trump gutted an aviation safety committee, which I think that was really a TSA committee. But like, again, this happened on the other side. I got into fights with Republicans back during the East Palestine train derailment, where there were like Rudy Giuliani and other people were out there talking about how Pete Buttigieg's paternity leave was to blame for this.
Right.
So maybe Trump is just taking advantage of like our broken society.
Well, I think he's speaking to like a really hard reality in politics in that like sometimes really bad things happen in the world and there's no rhyme or reason to it. And It makes us feel better when we can throw a conspiracy theory around the chaos or around the pain or something to explain this to ourselves, but that's not always going to be the case. And that might, this might have just been a horrible accident here. There could have been, we'll figure it out, right? But I saw the same things you did, like people blaming the air traffic controller shortage or the buyout proposal or firing the head of the TSA. And my instinct was to find that gross. And then I saw Trump this morning and I thought, I don't know, maybe I'm not built for politics anymore, Tim. Like maybe this is how it goes.
Maybe
gross is what it is.
You're kind of a softie. Yeah, I don't know. I do have to tell you, my initial instinct to be like, fuck it, blame Trump. Fuck it. Why not? Blame Trump. I mean, he blamed Newsom for the fires, and Pete, like caring for his kids in the NICU, was blamed for like everything that happened all over the country for 2 years. So why not? But, I took a couple breaths and I was like, well, we could probably just see what actually
just give
happened.
It a beat.
We could probably just see what happened. And I don't think that like my tweet or Norma Torres's tweet is really going to be the thing that
it's going to save it,
takes Trump down.
No, you got to blue sky it.
So I think we can probably wait to see what actually happened. Somebody who didn't wait to see what actually happened on various things is the nominee to be the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Bobby Kennedy. Were you a big Bobby fan?
Huge Bobby fan. I also just want to, before we get into substance, again, point out how tan he looks all of a sudden. I know he lives in California, but it hasn't been that nice out. So I'm wondering if there's bronzer adoption is kind of a administration-wide thing now.
I got to say, despite the fact that he wants to Maha, I've seen the shirtless pictures of him at Gold's, and that does not look like a natural human body.
No, that looks like TRT.
Yeah, that looks like. Well, I don't know anything about TRT. That may be something you're into, but
nor do I. But I'm thinking about getting into it because he looks pretty shredded. If we're being honest,
he looks shredded in some ways, but he has parts of his body that are like malformed. Like the size of which is not natural. So that's not for me. I'm kind of I like guys with muscles, but I like them to actually look like male humans, right? Not like male humanoid kind of avatar.
You're a Schlossberg fan living in an RFK world. We get it.
I do like the noodle voice. I want to listen to some of RFK's testimony from yesterday. What should we do first? Let's do heroin first. Let's listen to RFK talking about heroin.
Well, listen, I know people, including members of my family, who've had a much worse time getting off of SSRIs than people have getting off of heroin. It's the withdrawal period is, I mean, and it's written on the label.
I have some experience with this
documented.
myself.
What? And has he watched a movie about the opioid crisis? Like read a magazine article about this? It's kind of a pretty big deal lately. Like how hard it is for people to get off of heroin, and it caused like a nationwide crisis and many thousands of deaths.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't have a lot of experience with either SSRIs or heroin. I'm not aware of them, SSRIs, causing like a euphoric high or a craving or the need to take another one an hour later. I don't know. Maybe you have more experience with these things.
Do people? Me neither. I've got my own vices. Neither of these are them. But like again, I've read the news, and I've watched. What was the show? Dope Sick. I've watched Dope Sick. Really good.
Yeah, I read the book.
Serial.
Yeah, it's great.
I haven't heard any stories of people that are like, man, of course, getting off Lexapro, these sorts of things, I do think is not. I don't want to be like, oh, this is nothing. It's easy, but like, there aren't any stories of people that are so jonesing for their Lexapro that they've turned to fentanyl.
Right. That's exactly
seen anything like that out there.
Yeah, I mean, certainly your body can adjust to their presence in your system, and then getting off them can cause challenges, can lead to withdrawal symptoms. But to your point, I think this is kind of a few days or a few weeks long process, not an addiction that can plague people literally for the rest of their lives and can ruin their lives at a moment's notice if they relapse. So it's an outrageous and absurd comment.
Well, luckily the Secretary of Health and Human Services doesn't need to know anything about this. There are some other things that he didn't show a ton of knowledge about. I want to play a couple of clips of him being asked about Medicaid.
Mr. Kennedy, do you know how many babies born in this country are covered through Medicaid?
I would guess, I don't know the answer. I would guess about 30 million.
I have it, Mr. Kennedy. About 41% or 1.4 million babies births are financed by Medicaid, according to the National Center for Health Statistics.
Republicans, again, are looking at ways to potentially reform Medicaid to help, pay for President Trump's priorities, but to improve outcomes. What thoughts do you have regarding Medicaid reform?
Well, Medicaid is not working for Americans, and it's specifically not working for the target population. Most Americans, like myself, I'm on Medicare Advantage, and I'm very happy with it. Most people who are on Medicaid are not happy. The premiums are too high. The deductibles are too high.
There's not premiums and deductibles on Medicaid. I don't. How many people does he think is in the country if there are 30 million babies on Medicaid? 1 billion Americans. Matt Iglesias would be happy, but I don't think that's true. Well, were you impressed with his command of the sort of these very important healthcare policy matters that he's going to be in charge of?
Yeah, I mean, he's such a slippery, terrible person. And it did seem like he crammed for the test, but he kind of skipped like the 101. I mean, if you're going to merge Medicare and Medicaid, which is a proposal he floated, you should probably have an idea for how that would work. But when pressed on that, he's like, I don't have a plan. I'd love to work it out with you, member of Congress. At times, it didn't seem like he understood that it was Medicare, old people, Medicaid, poor people. He said Medicaid is fully paid for by the federal government. That's wrong. It's actually paid for by a combination of federal and state funds. And again, you made the point about how he was wrong about premiums and deductibles. They don't exist for the vast majority of Medicaid recipients. But we're talking about nearly $2 trillion worth of federal spending. I think Medicare was 14% of total spending in 2023. So these are enormous programs that he doesn't understand the basics of, let alone how to administer them.
Like, what are your thoughts on what the Democrats are supposed to do with this kind of thing? Because I want to get into Kash and Tulsi in a little bit. That's happening right now as we speak. But about him and Bondi and Hegseth, we get into nitpicking, right? Like how they're handling the Q&A and could they have a better plan, or could they coordinate better? Could they ask tougher questions? But that's on the one hand. On the other hand, I'm like, this is all a farce. RFK is like during the hearing yesterday pretended like he's for vaccines now. He has no idea what he's talking about the major programs that are going to be under his auspices. And so like what is a valuable use of Democrats' time on a hearing such as this?
Yeah, I mean, look, the no votes you're looking for are Collins, Murkowski, McConnell, and Cassidy. That's kind of like the four that people have ID'd that you need. So knowing that list, I mean, presumably the ways to reach them would be through talking about the fact that he's clearly pro-choice and now he's pretending to be anti-abortion. Maybe they don't believe him. I'm curious what you think about this pitch, Tim. The problem with attacking RFK is you kind of de facto end up siding with big pharma, the drug companies, the healthcare industry, right? Which is not where I ideologically am. I don't like those guys either. I also don't think it's smart politics. So the question is okay, how do you pick an enemy to kind of counteract that? I've noticed that the Wall Street Journal and their editorial page have decided that the enemy is trial lawyers. And they're saying that Kennedy is just going to open up a whole bunch more litigation pathways for his trial lawyer buddies, and that he might personally profit from some of those lawsuits. And I'm just curious if you think that angle is effective. I remember Atla being an enemy from my John Edwards for president days back in 2004. People didn't love trial lawyers. I remember my dad referring to Edwards as an ambulance chaser, and 24-year-old me got very offended. But I don't know. Is that an effective approach?
I love going after trial lawyers, so that works for me. It is confusing to me that the Republicans are now the party of trial lawyers and just they love passing legislation that lets people randomly sue. That's what underlines the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida. Mm-hmm. You can sue the school if a teacher says something too gay. That's what underlines the bounty abortion bill in Texas. You can sue a woman or the provider if they break the law, right? So there's a lot of new pathways for suing. I don't know if that's really going to land. I don't know. I'm torn. I think the Medicaid, why I wanted to play the Medicaid clips, and the whole hearing was a fucking just farce and clown show, so we could have played many clips. But to me, I think that the Medicaid ones are probably the best bet for Democrats. And I think that this is a program that serves poor people, and it serves a lot of poor working class whites in red states who are for Donald Trump. And Trump has been pretty deft at kind of claiming that he's not actually coming after the services that they like. So I think going after that, and I guess going after the Republicans for being phony, and that it does create a pickle here on this whole thing, right? It's just the whole thing is ridiculous. I mean, that you have Tom Tillis, you have corporate Republicans out there being like, boy, I really love this guy that sued companies on behalf of environmentalists, and sued pharmaceutical companies on behalf of anti-vax kooks. So I maybe going after them instead of going after RFK and trying to wedge is a better strategy. Because I hear you, defending the status quo is not really a winner for Democrats. You saw Polis try to navigate this a little bit.
Yeah, it's not really a winner. I mean, then there's the specific stories. I mean, I don't know how much you guys have talked about the Samoa incident on this show, but I do think it tells you everything you need to know about this guy. The quick and dirty version, right, is in American Samoa, there was this horrible incident where 2 babies died because the nurses administering the vaccine mixed the measles vaccine with an expired aesthetic, and it killed these 2 children. And it was this horrible, horrific mistake. And it ultimately, the 2 nurses went to jail for it, but it led to Samoa stopping vaccinations for about 10 months and then starting them up again. And then obviously people were very hesitant. So into the breach jumps RFK Jr. and the anti-vax crowd and this sort of information vacuum and climate of fear. And according to NBC News, what he was hoping to do was basically set up a study comparing the health outcomes of vaccinated and unvaccinated babies in Samoa. And what inevitably happens, right? Someone comes from New Zealand, they have the measles, an outbreak starts, like dozens and dozens of kids die. In response, Samoa launches this vaccination campaign. And in the midst of that, RFK is still having his people say, no, just give them vitamin A and vitamin C. But fast forward 6 weeks, 95% of kids in Samoa are vaccinated and there's no more measles related deaths. But just like the fact that what this man wanted was to run this giant, eugenics adjacent experiment on babies, I think kind of tells you everything you need to know about him and how he will approach overseeing the medical community. I mean, like, this is fucking deadly, completely unethical, immoral stuff that he's going to do. And like, this is his approach. This is what he believes.
Yeah. Just a couple other thoughts are coming to me as you say that. Like, on the one hand, I do think vaccinations are just broadly generally popular. I know that, maybe just focusing on the reemergence of the whooping cough is something that is useful. I do wonder though, like, is there a way just to sort of reframe this whole thing back to him being a Kennedy? Like, this isn't really like these guys like Trump and Kennedy, like they're pretending that they're going after the status quo, but they're not really. Like, they're taking cash for themselves. They've now aligned themselves with the richest men in the world. I don't know. I'm just spitballing live here, but I do think maybe that's a more fruitful line than I guess going after him for being a kook. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess going against the establishment or American royalty, that could work. But I think, this better than I do. Like, what the MAGA movement loves more than anything else is a convert. Whether you are a person of color or you're gay or you were once a liberal, like, that's why they love Tulsi. That's why they love RFK Jr. Those are the people that prove that they've been right all along over in the MAGA movement, and the libs were stupid. So I think that's kind of his entire power is his last name.
Yeah. And it is, I do think that it has to be somewhat appealing to you, though, when you think about the incoming administration, that you do have a far left polygamist environmentalist, right? And you have somebody representing Aloha in Hawaii. You have a lot of diverse. It's kind of a woke cabinet.
It's the spirit of Aloha.
Let's talk about Tulsi for a second. Some of the reporting people on the Hill say that their concerns about Tulsi, but Tulsi had Tom Cotton doing the intro for her. I mean, like, if there's ever going to be somebody that was going to be opposed to her, it'd be that. She's totally flipped on all of her, all of the things like FISA and that's the national security Republicans don't like. So I don't know. I'm wondering what you think about the Tulsi nomination.
Yeah, I mean, she's not remotely qualified to do the job, and I think it's just good to remember kind of first principles here. I mean, like, they're like, oh, she was in the military, she had a security clearance. That doesn't mean she had access to any information. It doesn't mean she knows how the intelligence community works. It doesn't mean she knows how to manage all of these people. It does seem like her biggest problem is her willingness to believe bad information and discount good information, especially when the bad information is coming from like the Russians or the Syrians and the good information is coming from the US. But then the second biggest problem I see to have with her, or I see for her, is that she is a liar. You've probably talked about her trip to Syria in 2017, where she met with Assad for 3 hours.
You're not a daily listener of the pod, I take it.
Of course I am. I do nothing else. Met with Assad's wife for an hour and then met with Assad again. Did you guys talk about the story or read the story where when she got back to the U.S., her staff was trying to scramble to like report to the ethics committee why she met with Assad, since that wasn't cleared in advance, and they left like all the Google Doc changes on. So some reporter found the Google Doc and could see all their spins and lies. And so, long story short, she goes to Lebanon, dips over to Damascus for a meeting with Assad, and pretended that it was spontaneous. She got there, Assad just wanted to meet with her, but actually the meeting was within 1 hour of her arrival. So she lied to her colleagues, she lied to her own staff, she lied to the ethics committee about all of this, and it just leads you to the question, why? Because like, I have no problem, is a general matter, I'm not like offended by meeting with adversaries, but meeting with Assad in the middle of this brutal civil war where he's killing 500,000 people is bizarre and gross. And also, did you know that she brought her spouse and she went with Dennis Kucinich, who brought his wife? Like, who brings a +1 to a civil war?
Yeah, and then she spun for him, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's the other thing, right? It's like because that's the quick response you hear from her defenders, right? It's like, well, we should have open dialogue. It's like, okay, well, I mean, we can. I don't know. I'm probably less keen on open dialogue than you and Tulsi, but okay, that's fine. That's one thing. But then it's like you have the dialogue, and then you come back, and you are a propaganda tool for Assad, right?
Right.
And that is the thing. And then our own intelligence services at the time. This is a story I was reading yesterday. Said that they caught chatter of Hezbollah terrorists they were monitoring that were talking about how Tulsi was meeting with the big guy.
So Joe Biden, I assume.
Yeah, Joe Biden, 10 for the big guy. It's always a question: who is the big guy out there?
So many big guys.
But to me, it's absurd to think that national security Republicans would go along with this. But at this point, we've learned that they don't actually care about anything besides suckling up to Trump. But I guess as somebody that has actually had security briefings and been, kind of involved in these conversations where you're getting intelligence and trying to translate it and figure out, how to use it and what to do with it. What would be the legitimate concerns that people would have about somebody like Tulsi managing that process?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, Tulsi and the agency she runs is going to be charged with putting together the PDB, the President's Daily Briefing, which is the most, crown jewels of all U.S. intelligence on all the issues happening in the world that Trump needs to know about. And is she going to bring in credible stuff? Is she going to put that document together in an ideological way? Is she going to continue to disbelieve, the CIA or other components of the intelligence community when they say Assad used chemical weapons and blame somebody else? So I think the question is what information is she getting? How is she constructing that document for Donald Trump and filtering intelligence information to the President of the United States and other top decision makers? And on top of that, every National Security Council meeting will usually begin with a laydown from the DNI of the most relevant information on whatever the topic is, Afghanistan, Yemen, whatever it is. So she's going to be kind of doing the PDB process and then repeating that in every national security meeting. It's why her? No one can answer the question. Why does this person make sense for this job other than some kind of payback for a political favor?
Well, I mean, she's probably the most in line with Donald Trump out of all of the nominees as far as processing intelligence and
what she likes,
churning
pictures,
out something that you like. I mean, Tulsi got tricked by Gateway Pundit, right? Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what Trump's looking for, I think, in somebody that is going to take the craziest shit that advances his narrative that is out there in the ether and presents that as the main narrative and blocks out or pushes out things that are contrary, right? I mean, that's what her skill set is, I think.
Yeah, and she's also, I mean, I don't know, all the things that some parts of the MAGA movement liked about her, anti-surveillance, pro-Snowden, she seems to have flip-flopped on a lot of that. It sounds like she's now in favor of Section 702 intelligence collection, which is the U.S. government working with American technology companies to get access to stuff. It sounds like, she was a huge proponent in 2019. I think she went on Rogan and said that she would drop all charges against Edward Snowden if she were president. Now it seems like she's flipped on that position. So I guess I just don't know where Tulsi stands on anything anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'm going to sound like a cliche, never Trump cuck, but it is noteworthy in these hearings I've had to suffer through that all of the controversial shit that is out there in MAGA world that we say are conspiracies and that they are no, I don't know. There's really something here. We're just asking questions about that. Across the board on all of that stuff, these guys are flipping. Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, Tulsi is flipping her view on Snowden and on the corruption within the intelligence community. RFK is flipping his view on vaccines. We're going to get to Kash next. He's flipped on the January 6th cop beaters. Right. That trend you would think would be noticed at some point. The QAnon Kash flipped on on all of these things. A generic MSNBC watching wine mom, who we love, who has no experience on anything, would have been more correct than the people that are now nominated to run these agencies who have now flipped their views to match the view of the generic MSNBC wine mom. I do think that's a noteworthy trend.
Yeah, and I guess that's all that's required for Tom Cotton. He's just like that credulous. He's like, all right, cool. Works for me. 702 supporting Snowden's staying in jail. I'm good.
Speaking of credulous, I'm just getting fucking pisser and pisser as we go on here today, Tommy. I'm going to have a fucking heart attack before the end of this administration. I was just thinking back. I am still mad about Trump and Vance. I'm just like, the more we talk about it, this was happening live, so I'm processing it live. And the poor family members of these victims of this plane crash, like, have to watch the president rant about DEI. Like,
yeah,
I mean, that's just the whole thing that pisses me off. All right.
Well, all the secretaries and JD, I mean, they just got up there and they just fluffed the president and said how amazing his leadership had been. It's like, I don't know. It sounds like he did a conference call. They didn't.
They're the worst people.
Didn't do anything.
All right. Credulous. You talked about how credulous Tom Cotton was. He's got nothing on Jimmy Langford and Thom Tillis. Here's James Langford today. There's a social media, national media persona of who Kash is. And then there's who he actually is. There's this cartoon of him that's out there, that he's mean, hateful, intense. And then when you meet him, you think, where is that person that's being described? I don't know, James. Have you ever watched a show about a bad guy? I don't know. Maybe Tony Soprano can be pretty charming in a 20-minute meeting. Like, you can be a person that is advanced, hateful, intense, and mean material and conspiratorial material, and then also be able to pull it together for 20 minutes to suck up to a senator.
There's a bad social media perception and persona of Kash Patel out there. Whose fault is that? Maybe him tweeting that he's going to chainsaw off the heads of various elected officials, or going on every right-wing podcast and talking about his enemies list and all the evil happening in the deep state and lying about his background and pretending he was, the lead prosecutor in Benghazi when he was just like a junior lawyer kind of helping out on the edges. Like, yeah, there's a bad sort of sentiment out there about Kash Patel because he's an unqualified, deeply dishonest person. And that seems like a bad thing for an FBI director.
He's a clown that had a podcast on Epoch Times, which is the conspiracy website. And
I didn't know that, actually.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He was a competitor of yours. You didn't see him in the charts. But he had a podcast on the Epoch Times. It was Cash's Corner. I've had to suffer through it a few times.
Jesus.
Like the whole, everything that he doesn't even deny any of the things that people say he said. It's just like, well, I guess that's just part of the kayfabe. It's like WWE. It's like Rowdy Roddy Piper getting on the mic. It's like, that's not the real Rowdy. He's just saying what he said about Jake the Snake Roberts because that's part of the show. I guess that's their argument.
A lot of people confuse is a good person with nice to me. You hear that with a lot of these kind of bro influencers who like, oh, Trump was great when I met him at UFC 64 or whatever.
Yeah,
well, it doesn't mean he was a good person. The thing about Kash, the single most troubling story about Kash Patel to me, Tim, comes from his time at the Pentagon at the very end of the Trump administration. Long story short, there was a hostage being held in the kind of Nigeria area. The Pentagon launched this rescue mission. They had a bunch of Navy SEALs in an airplane who are going to parachute out of that plane, land, traipse over, like walk a couple miles and rescue this guy. And to conduct a mission like that, you need to get permission to fly into the country's airspace, in this case, Nigerian airspace. And they're about to turn on this operation, greenlight it. Kash says the State Department got us access into Nigerian airspace. And then right as the plane with the Navy SEALs in it is about to fly into that airspace, they figure out that he had lied and he just made that up. And so Kash Patel nearly blows up what was ultimately a successful rescue mission. And also, the worst case scenario is you fly a bunch of a U.S. military aircraft into Nigerian airspace and it gets shot down. And to this day, no one knows why he lied about it. Like Mark Esper, the Secretary of Defense at the time, writes about it in his book. There were top Pentagon officials screaming at Kash, and he was like, who fucking cares? Everything worked out in the end. And it's just the most irresponsible thing I've ever heard.
Okay, I just want to say, just for the record, in case there are lawyers listening, that story that Tommy shared was shared by Tommy. That is alleged. And his former Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, also shared it. But Kash is currently suing Olivia Troy, my friend, for relaying that same story on MSNBC. So I just want to say that if there are any lawsuits pending, that was Tommy Vietor that said that, and I'm open to any facts that might emerge.
I'm very open to any facts. If Kash Patel wants to come on this show or any of the shows on Crooked Media and correct the record and correct me, I am absolutely willing to listen. I'm just, this is what I read. You're a
questioner. I've watched some of your interviews. Speaking of Kash lying, I've got a clip here from today's hearing that I would like to play.
Stu Peters, does that name ring a bell?
I'm sorry, what?
Are you familiar with Mr. Stu Peters?
Not off the top of my head.
He made 8 separate appearances on his podcast. He promoted outrageous conspiracy theories and worked with a prominent neo-Nazi.
This is like when my mother came, was like, was there a glass bong in your room?
Was there marijuana at the party?
I'm sorry, what? She's like, glass bong. I'm like, ooh, that doesn't ring a bell. And she's like, this glass bong. It's like, what? 8 times he's been on the podcast. A guy named Arjun Modi, who's a GOP Senate staffer, came to Kash's defense on this. I tweeted about this exchange, and he came to Kash's defense. He writes this: in context, Kash did over 1,000 media interviews submitted to the committee. I don't remember what I had for lunch yesterday.
Okay.
What do you think about that, Tommy? Do you think there's anybody who's done 8 podcast interviews with you who couldn't recognize your name?
I am forgettable. You
are just a white guy named Tom.
Just a DEI hire. What that story tells me is the degree to which Republican senators see things happen where they know a nominee that they're about to vote for just lied and just don't care. And they just think it's a game, and they think that deniability is all that matters and the truth is irrelevant. And it sucks. It's incredibly frustrating because what do you do there? Well, it's like the worst fight in a relationship ever. It's like when you say to someone, you did this, and they just won't give you an inch, and they give no quarter, or they deny it, and they're lying. But where do you go from there?
Yeah, I might revisit it, I guess. I don't know. I'm feeling like the Joker. But in the afternoon session of this, I might just kind of revisit Kash. Just be like, it's Stu Peters. I'm sorry. I know this might seem silly, but I've got to go back to the Stu Peters thing. Does it ring a bell now that you've been reminded you did 8 podcast interviews with them?
Yeah, that's a good way to do it. Here, as a general matter, what I think love to see every single senator at these hearings do is stop giving fucking speeches and just use your 8 minutes for questions. But that's a perennial problem.
No, I do. I've been torn on this because I've also been giving the Democratic senators shit. I had Mark Kelly on this pod last week, and I was like, why don't you guys coordinate better? He didn't have a good answer to that, really. I thought his questions were good, but some of the others weren't. That was with regards to the Hegseth hearing. But I don't know, man. If the Republicans are going to vote for this guy anyway, are we sure that giving a speech that goes on YouTube or TikTok isn't a better use of time than like asking him questions he's going to lie about? That's a genuine question. I'm kind of going back and forth on what is a useful. Like, if you thought that you could stop it, then I think strategy is important.
Yeah.
If we're just accepting that the Republicans are totally shameless and are going to vote in these unqualified people, then maybe the strategy mindset changes a little bit.
I think use your time to get information, try to pin them down on things, whether it's policy or perjury. But I mean, if it's a really good speech, it's an incredibly compelling, passionate speech that goes super viral on TikTok. Like, that's great. But like, I was watching Peter Welch spend
he was horrible
several minutes talking about how much, he was like a RFK scholar in college. I really like Peter Welch. I think he's good on policies, done a lot of great stuff. But I was like, what are we doing here? It's like 4 minutes of your time.
You also just know your skills. Peter Welch is a nice person. He's fine, but maybe give your time over to somebody that knows what they're doing. Amy
That's what they did at the
Jan
6 committee, right? Yeah. Like, they kind of gave it to a prosecutor or gave it to one individual and let you really narrow in. It's a much better way to go.
It'd be like if the Bulwark had a weightlifting competition against Crooked Media, I'd be I'd be like, don't put me in on that one, put me in on one of the other events where I know where I can add some value.
Is JVL your ringer?
Joe Perticone, I think. Losing Caputo is pretty big on that, unfortunately, but I don't know.
Sam Stein's not doing
I've
squats.
been over to Crooked headquarters. I don't think the competition's going to be very stiff on the weightlifting. No. What else did I have? I had one more thing on Kash. I think Tom Tillis might be my least favorite senator now, Tommy. And I really the thing I want the most in the world, which means it won't happen, is I want the porn store pizza man to challenge him in a primary and beat him. Like I want it really badly. Tillis passed out a Kash K $H bingo card game today that check the square if a Democrat says subjects such as deep state or enemies list or QAnon, and it's just like the problem with him is some of these guys, Marjorie Taylor Greene doesn't pretend to be serious. So like, give me Marjorie Taylor Greene over this. Tom Tillis is like condescending lectures about how the Democrats are the ones that are asking unfair questions, amidst a hearing where like you have legitimate questions about an incoming FBI director that was producing the January 6th choir. To act like that is some preposterous thing for the Democrats to bring up that you should just mock with your silly bingo card game. Like, fuck you, Tom Tillis. Like, what is this?
You got a 44-year-old guy with no relevant experience, barely any relevant experience, who's nominated to lead the FBI for a decade because Trump fired the last guy he nominated to leave the FBI for a decade after firing the first one, Jim Comey. So we should be asking this dude questions. I mean, the enemies list thing is the part of that pisses me off the most. It's in his book. He published a book with a list of enemies. Does that? If
and
that
he
does
talked
not
about it a
bother you,
lot on several of those 1,000 podcasts. He talked about his enemies.
Yes, it is exhausting. Yeah, Tom Tillis, he's up in 26. I guess he must have decided that this is the one he's going to kind of go full MAGA on. They're never going to like you. They're not going to support you. You're not going to get you're not going to be accepted by them. Be your own man.
I will say it was interesting. Much more on Kash tomorrow. We got Andrew Weissman on, but just one other thing that was interesting from today. He didn't elide the question about the pardons for the cop beaters. He specifically said he disagreed with that. With Trump.
I did not see that.
Yeah,
interesting.
I found that interesting. I mean, it's fake.
Probably have to say it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure he cuts the deal behind the scenes. He calls Don Jr. or whatever, and it's like, just tell Daddy. Maybe he calls Shadow President Elon Musk. I don't know. Maybe he calls Donald directly, but it's just like, hey, you got to give me one here.
It's a weird one though. Like, who is that for? It's for the building, I guess, for the FBI when you get there. But does it get you anything from the senators who vote on you, who give you the job? I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, who's the fourth senator that would have cared about that? That's a good question. Not Tom Tillis.
Nope.
Okay. I wanted to get your take also on, there's just been this kind of clown OMB we're freezing and then we're rescissioning the freeze and then we're refreezing and then we're unfreezing. And a lot of the stuff is kind of the details are going to bleed out. But the one area where they do seem to be pretty serious about freezing grants and funds is in foreign aid. And they brought up the fake story about the Gaza condoms as one of the things that they're going to freeze. That's not true. Actually, the condoms are going to Africa as part of the anti-AIDS program, as part of PEPFAR, which was a Republican program initially. But they're going to cut all USAID. So I'm just kind of curious, given your experience in that world, what you think the potential ramifications of this are.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're calling it a freeze. I think we should assume that all of these programs are gone unless otherwise indicated and gone permanently, right? I think, the foreign aid budget.
Well, they didn't freeze, just to be clear, they did not freeze the aid to Israel
and Egypt.
Or Egypt.
Which is
so heck of a job to the Egypt bagmen and to our friends who protested the genocide, Joe.
Yeah. Well, the Egypt money is all about Israeli security operations. So, I mean, in 2023 there was $63 billion of foreign aid. That's less than 1% of the federal budget. But as you know, Tim, when you do focus groups or polling, people think the foreign aid budget is closer to 10%. Right. So there's political, it's
a political winner for sure.
Yeah. But like the money we're talking about goes to fund things like combating Ebola or Marburg virus outbreaks abroad, or monitoring the avian flu, or cleaning up mines and cluster munitions that didn't blow up in places like Ukraine or Laos and Cambodia. But it also, there's also money for education in Jordan, the country, which gives us enormous leverage and political influence in these places. And if we just turn that off, that influence is now gone. And you mentioned, there's a lot of political attacks on foreign aid, but you mentioned PEPFAR. I mean, PEPFAR is George Bush's greatest accomplishment. It saved 25 million people. It was like universally supported. Recently, I forget which Republican senator started attacking it because like $4,000 were accidentally spent on abortion services in some country, and that money was refunded. And I don't know if that got it on the chopping block, but now it sounds like there's, AIDS drugs on the shelf in clinics that they're not allowed to distribute. It's insane.
There's also the soft power. You were kind of forgetting at this in the Jordan example, but I like the soft power element to this, particularly in the context of China. Like the thing to me that's like the most incoherent about this is you've got some elements of the Trump administration and Trump world that are very, saber rattly about China and China hawks and the threats from China and this great power struggle that we're in. And part of that is the fact that China has been buying influence with a lot of countries throughout the world, particularly some in our hemisphere now, doing programs such as the one you described in Jordan, right? And so if we kind of get off the playing field there, you already saw this little dust up with Colombia. Mm-hmm. Like if you're Colombia, if you're Petro, like why aren't you like, well, I guess I'll just deal with China. I'll do trade with China, right? Like they might feel like a more reliable ally right now. To me, it just undermines the whole China hawk element of what they're arguing.
Totally. I mean, the China infrastructure projects often are devastating for countries down the road because they create these debt traps that the countries can't get out of. But you know what they don't come with?
You can't trust the CCP.
No, you can't trust the CCP.
That's not xenophobic. Now that you're on the Bulwark podcast, you can say it without any accusations of xenophobia.
War and pandemic. We're on the show. We're talking about the CCP. But the Chinese money doesn't come with any strings attached around like human rights. Right. So it's a little bit easier. But you're right. I mean, it's not just that we're turning off money that gives us influence in places and China can fill the breach. It's that we're actively being dickheads to people in Panama, Colombia, Denmark for absolutely no reason. And these are like, Denmark's a NATO ally. Like, okay, let's play this out for me, Tim. The United States military sends a whole bunch more U.S. military members to our base in Greenland. And we just decide we've annexed it and occupied it. Like, what happens then? Does NATO have an Article 5 responsibility to respond to this U.S. invasion of Greenland on behalf of Denmark? Like, this whole thing is just, it's like a farce in some ways. It's insane. But this is kind of the reality of what we're talking about right now. And it makes us look like clowns and unreliable.
When you talk to folks in like advocacy world, and is there anything in particular that they're the most alarmed about, I guess, in the first week and a half, particularly kind of with the Pod Save the World hat on?
I mean, the most interesting kind of thread I saw on this was by a guy named Atul Gawande, mm-hmm. who got into all the public health projects that were being impacted by this, the funding freeze. And that, I think, was where people's head instantly went, just in terms of the risk to Americans, like something that could boomerang back on us pretty quickly.
All right, I want to do a little politics, and then every time you're on, I like to give you a world leader quiz. We can close with that. But I was talking with Chris Hayes on Tuesday, and he's got the new book about the attention economy mm-hmm. and how like Trump has successfully leveraged this. And this is, I guess, kind of related to our first topic in the darkest sense of how Trump has leveraged this. Leverage, so to speak, this tragedy outside of Reagan Airport. But one of the things we're talking about were the Democrats just are struggling with this, and in part because they have to kind of go through this deprogramming from what was a smart politician behavior 15 years ago versus what is smart politician behavior now. And I played him a clip of Gretchen Whitmer, and I hate to pick on Gretchen Whitmer because I think this is across the board something that all Democrats are doing, but I just want to use it as an example because she is the type of person that might be up in 2028 and because it is just spot on what we're talking about here. So let's listen to Gretchen Whitmer on CBS this morning, earlier this week.
I think this is the story of Michigan, right? We're a very diverse state. We are a state that tends to go back and forth and likes some balance in our politics. And I've won twice with big margins within 2 years of Donald Trump also carrying Michigan. And so, as I said in my recent address, I'm not out looking for fights. I'm always looking to collaborate first. I won't back down from an important one, that's for sure. But I got a job to do, and we're going to stay focused on moving forward and trying to find common ground where we can.
What's the lesson in that split ticket situation for you as governor now?
I think it's to keep listening to the people, and it's part of what I talk about in my book that we've just made for young adults. These are lessons that you can use at any age, right? Learning how to listen is a superpower that not enough people tap into.
All right, Tommy, I want you to pretend we're at a DNC media training session. We just played that clip, and you're talking to the candidates. What kind of feedback do you have?
I guess where I'm struggling with this is I do think that voters want to hear about common ground and working together and blah, 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 blah. But right now we're an opposition party with no power. And so it doesn't fucking matter if we work together with them or not. They don't need us. They don't want us. They don't care. And so I think you have to act accordingly and raise the awareness and the cost of some of the most egregious things Trump is doing. And that gets complicated when you're talking about areas where clearly Democrats are off sides, like immigration. The Lake and Riley Act got a bunch of Democratic votes. It does things that I find like indefensible on a policy level, like just deporting people accused of a crime. That just discards all due process rights for people in this country. But I think mostly it's like, be fucking interesting, talk like a human being, pick a fight, go into places that are unusual so that whatever you're doing gets shared on social media. I mean, Tim, you and I both spend a lot of times in safe spaces with people who agree with us, like MSNBC, whatever. But, I went on Fox the other day with Jesse Waters.
Oh, we're getting to that.
That interview I heard from more people. It got more pickup than like anything else I've done. So I don't know. Maybe we need a little more combat.
Yeah, I've got some feedback for you in your Jesse Waters interview. We'll get to that in a second.
Okay,
but I want to stick with Whitmer here first, or not Whitmer, just with the Democratic challenge broadly, because like the Lake and Riley Act is an example. So you said, right, that like they don't need us, they don't want us. Like Republicans kind of do need Democrats actually to get stuff done, and we'll see what they can do. I think that they're going to be in a big challenge on the Hill to get things passed. Republican Study Committee put out a statement the other day that's I think 180 House members that were like, we're only going to vote for a reconciliation bill if it cuts the deficit.
That's true.
And if you go back and listen to the Liam Donovan article interview I did a couple weeks ago, like you can hear how that's impossible, right? So they're going to come to the Democrats for bailouts on budget stuff. They came to
get something
to get to the 60 votes on the Lake and Riley thing. Maybe that was the right strategic thing to do, but maybe not. Or like, are people really going to be voting on the Lake and Riley Act in 2026? Like, we're 20 months away from another election, and so I don't know. Actually, I mean, is saying that we're going to collaborate with the Trump administration really getting you anything?
I mean, it's just like the most anodyne talking point. And so whether or not those are the right words to say, who's going to hear that, right? Like, well, there's no pickup of this, of just kind of very boring comments.
I've played it twice on the podcast now because it was so boring. So kudos to you for that.
Listen, I like on the politics question, like, I don't know, the politics for Ruben Gallego in Arizona are probably very different than a lot of other members, right? And Ruben was like very vocally for the Lake and Riley Act. And will people be voting on immigration in the midterms? I don't know. I mean, the Trump's goal presumably is to lock down the border and solve all our immigration problems. And it doesn't mean he'll stop talking about it or making up caravans, but does that reduce the salience? Like, I don't know. It's an interesting bet. But yeah, no, I think we're an opposition party and we have to act accordingly and talk like people and be nimble and be interesting.
Has anybody done well in the last week and a half? Because it would be one thing to be complaining about this in December, but he had an inauguration. We've had all of these hearings. We had this press conference today. There have been plenty of opportunities to go say interesting things, to go to different types of places. Is there anybody that you think is really nailing it?
Yeah, I mean, like Congressman Pat Ryan's sort of been saying and doing interesting things, trying to be out there, trying to be clear-cut, clear-eyed. I mean, I think what you're getting at and what Democrats are feeling is that there is a leadership void. We have, Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries are the leaders in both houses in the Senate or in Congress, but there's not a Democratic leader. Like, there's not a
Schumer
nominee.
Talked about how aroused people are getting.
Yeah,
that was pretty good.
That was hard to watch.
I'm all right.
A little flaccid, a little tepid. Yeah. So,
I just go to look, this is the thing in 2016. I used to make fun of it. So I'm the person I used to make fun of now. So I will admit it. But in 2016, when I was working for Jeb, we would mock the defense of Trump among, the Winnie the Pooh in the tuxedo defense of Trump back then in 2015 was but he fights. He might have some issues in his personal life. We want somebody that fights these evil Obama bros, right? Mm-hmm. And that didn't resonate with me then because, I think he made some mistakes, but I didn't really feel deep in my core that you needed to be fought by the stupidest American. But so that obviously is why I'm disconnected from my former party. But now I feel that. You could sell me on that, a but she fights or a but he fights, as somebody that I don't agree with on every issue, but that I know is going to go there and go to the mat against this farcical shit, this sham that we've been subjected to for the last week and a half. And it's nobody's really giving me that. I know see a little bit, you mentioned Pat Ryan, Chris Murphy a little bit, but no guttural, nothing from the gut.
Yes. I want a fighter. I also think obstruction works. Mitch McConnell built an entire career off of that. So the senators should find ways to bog down everything Trump does. It's also just when Barack Obama won in 2008, he got 365 electoral votes. We had huge majorities in the House and the Senate. Did Republicans wipe their hands and give up? No, they fought everything we did tooth and nail, and they drove down our favorables into the midterms of 2010. And that, to me, is the roadmap. It's just all focus on the midterms.
I've been saying the word sham too much, so people, I gotta get out my thesaurus or farce. I've been saying too much sham too. I don't know. We'll see. There's a lot of bad stuff. Speaking of farces, you went on Water's World, as you mentioned earlier. If we're gonna make fun of the other Democrats and give them some feedback, I've got some feedback for you.
I'd love to hear your media training.
I want to listen to a clip of you on Water's World.
How many genders are there, Tommy? How many genders are there, Tommy?
The honest answer, Jesse, I don't care. I'm a libertarian. I don't care. Be what you want to be. You can be what you want to be, Jesse. Live your truth.
Well, I'm not a Democrat, and that we know.
Okay. I didn't know you were a libertarian.
I actually run the New Hampshire Democratic Party's libertarian party's feed. Yeah, I
really?
First of all, I don't think that anyone who goes on an unserious show should be forced to treat unserious questions like they're serious. The subjects I was sent in advance were we're going to talk about Biden's legacy, the pardons, and Democrats going forward. So that just gives you some insight. Also, though, I am libertarian on most social issues.
Really?
I think the role of the government should be to leave people the fuck alone. If you decide your gender is something other than male and female, good for you. Live your life however you want. If you want to have an abortion, the government should leave you the fuck alone. I'm very much am a libertarian on a whole basket of issues.
The libertarian moment is back. I was just happy to hear it. I'd never heard you say you're a libertarian before. I was like, man, we've got more in common than I thought. I don't know.
I wasn't expecting that question.
An opportunity to go after Jesse, to be like, yeah, Jesse, I don't know. I think that there are two genders, but sometimes people, process their alignment with each gender differently. You see this in sex as well. There are men with 2 balls, there are men with 1 ball. For men who gave both of their balls over to Donald Trump.
Wow. Okay.
That'd be one thing to do. There are only a couple ways to do a marriage, right? You can have a closed marriage, you can have an open marriage, or you can have a closed marriage where you cheat on your wife with a woman that works for you and you're a sex pest at the office. That might have been another thing to consider. I'm just spitballing here. Different options.
Those are different approaches. And I think they all could have worked. The one thing I thought about after the fact that I should have done was just be like, can we talk about Dominion voting, or what was one anything they'd been sued for various defamation cases? Just try to repeatedly bring that up. That's a next time thing.
Dominion. All right, I think you should keep going on there. Is
I like going
on.
Else
Else you want to do? Just generally speaking, bro pods, crypto. What do you think could be a useful use of your time?
I said
using the Jesse Waters appearance as kind of a training.
I want to practice what I preach a little bit, get out some more. I really respect the fact, Tim, that you do a lot of adversarial stuff, you're kind of at press conferences.
That was not a fish for a compliment. But
no, well, listen, you found one. Fish on.
But seriously.
No, I'm serious.
What is actually useful? Because I want to get this. Sometimes it's not actually useful. Yelling at at Clay Travis, like I find kind of satisfying. But am I convincing it? You know what I mean? Is that useful?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I've been thinking about this a lot. I've actually, I've taken your counsel. I'm happy to be public about this. Like, I find Steve Bannon very interesting. I listen to his show often. I think when you listen to Bannon talk, you're usually like a couple weeks ahead of the curve on where the MAGA movement is going. I would like to better understand what he thinks Trump 2.0 is like. I'd love to press him on whether the MAGA populism he's voted for is represented when you have billionaire, liberal tech oligarchs sitting on stage and Elon running, huge swaths of the administration. I went on a Barstool show when I was in New York. I want to do more stuff where we're just like, I hate the fucking platforming debate. I'm done with the platforming debate where people are platformed. And I just want to go into places where there's a little more, I don't like debate. Like, I hate the Ben Shapiro owns a 19-year-old content, but a conversation with someone that disagrees with you vociferously, like, that's a good thing.
I agree with that. And and particularly the non-political, this is, I guess, what I'm trying to think of. I think it's more challenging, but I think it'd be valuable for you and all your fellow bro, probably not love it, but Favreau and other fellow bros, Pat Ryans, to go on non-political conservative coded shows.
Totally.
Right? Like, because I think that there's limited, maybe minor value in me yelling at Clay Travis. I think there'd be very real value in going on the Barstools, the Theo Vons, some of this other kind of stuff, the Aiden Roth, right? Like the streamers doing some of that. I think would be useful. It is all kind of tied up in crypto.
Yeah.
Do you own any crypto?
I own like a little tiny bit. I wish I owned a lot more.
Yeah, do you have any regrets over that? Because I've been thinking about this lately.
Yeah.
I'm so fucking pissed about the Trump coin thing and how this whole thing is just such an obvious fraud, and like how so many of these coins are such an obvious fraud, and like how these rug pulls are going to screw people over, and it's been making me mad. But I've been doing some self-examination, and I'm wondering if part of my anger is related to the fact that I've left so much money on the table. So
yeah, we all missed a generational wealth opportunity. I lived in San Francisco in 2015. If I just listened to like one nice nerd who said, hey, you should buy Ethereum or whatever it was at the time, it would have been cool. A couple thoughts on this, Tim. I think we all have to stop saying like bro, tech bro, crypto bros, because it's obviously like I'm a pod bro. It's obviously pejorative and condescending, and I think they don't like it. It's no mystery why whatever comes after
Leave
that.
It to the libs. More speech codes for me.
Yeah.
All right, I can't say bro. I've got to say Latinx.
Yeah.
I get it. Whatever, Tommy. All right,
we can say what we want.
Point.
We can say what we want, but we should probably not to be surprised when people tune out everything after.
Okay, fair.
I think I was talking to Ro Khanna about this the other day. One thing I think Democrats miss is there is a piece of the crypto story that is aspirational. It's not just like get rich quick, but there is that. It's also anti-establishment. It's people who felt like they were sticking it to the big banks in the system and kind of operating outside of the control of, whatever they're kind of pushing against. And I do think Democrats can sound overly negative and like assholes who are just oppositional to this stuff. So we have to capture part of that narrative in the hopeful message, but also talk about the fact that Trump coin and meme coins and so much of this stuff is a grift. It is a Ponzi scheme. It is going to hurt people. You're going to have more like kind of SBF collapses and Lunaterra collapses. And there need to be like regulations that protect people. So that's the other part.
It is tough,
message.
right? That's my problem with the whole Roe talking point on all this, right? It's like, okay, I've got to be more open-minded towards the Ponzi scheme that's getting the worst people in the world rich, I guess. All right. Sure. That's good advice, I guess. I don't know.
It's just about how you talk to people. It's just about like
advice.
Persuasion, hearing people and trying to like not make them feel attacked. And I think, I think Trump, Biden did some good things trying to regulate these tech companies. It was obviously long past time, but in the process, it seems like we radicalized a lot of rich people who poured money into Donald Trump and Republican coffers.
All right. Final area before I get you on the Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego pop quiz. I am curious about, you're monitoring the world. We're looking for positives out there. Not a lot of positives happening domestically. Do you have a favorite world leader? Like, I wish I could like Milei. He'd be right in my actual libertarian bones if he wasn't such a suck up to Trump. And so I'm looking. Give me a lib. Give me a good lib around the world that I can be excited about.
Anthony Albanese in Australia.
Okay.
He doing anything for you?
I know nothing about that person. So that's a good project for me this weekend. Anthony
progressive.
Albanese.
You can Google him. The problem is right now things are a little messy internationally.
You don't.
You saw the Canadians. You just had Trudeau step down. There's a real chance that Pierre Poilievre comes to power in Canada, the conservative leader. It looks like the G7. You got South Korea. They just had a little martial law incident. They're trying to prosecute, impeach, and remove their president. That seems bad. The Germans are about to have an election. We got Elon kicking up dust for the far right party. So things are a little messy, man. I don't know. There's not a lot I'm especially hopeful. I mean, Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, they had a rough start, but they're going to be in power for a while. They could do some good things. Does that help? David Lammy, Foreign Secretary in the UK. I like him a lot. Know him a little personally.
All right. Okay.
Big New Yorker piece on him this week.
I'll start Googling. I'll check out that New Yorker piece. I'm just looking for hope anywhere. All right.
Okay.
That takes us to the final topic. You know that George W. Bush was embarrassed when he was asked to name random foreign leaders, and all the libs were so excited to make fun of him for not knowing that. And since you have a podcast about the world, I'd like to ask you about that. I've got some friends who are traveling through Asia.
Oh, God, I'm not going to know any of these names.
And so I would like for you to tell us the Prime Minister of Japan, or the President of Vietnam, or the Prime Minister of Thailand. Any of those three world leaders. Can you get any of those?
Would you say Thailand is...
Japan, Thailand, and Vietnam.
Thavison?
Thavison is which one?
Thailand. No?
No, the Prime Minister is Shinwarata, actually.
Are you sure?
But maybe are there multiple? I don't know what the Thai system is.
I'm going to Google.
Maybe it's a multi.
I'm going to Google I'm going to cheat on this one.
You're Googling?
No, I'm just going to Google Thavison.
Thavison's been gone since August 2024. To be fair to you,
okay.
Thavison just went out August 2024. So that's pretty good. We'll give you half a point for that. Shinawatra is the new Prime Minister.
Okay. Well, and then, yes. Oh, sorry, you're right. That's a good point. And then the Japanese have had like a bunch of leaders very recently. Ishiba is the current one.
That's correct. Ishiba.
Okay, good. What was the other country you asked about?
Vietnam.
No fucking clue.
No clue.
I'm going to Google it.
I can't pronounce this person's name, but
Say it.
It looks like since 21 October, another new one. A lot of turnover over there in East Asia. General. It's a general. Uh-oh. Watch out for Vietnam. Quang. General Quang. So there you go. 1.5 points out of 3. That's a C.
That's not good. That's not
great. But
Pakistan, Shabazz Sharif. I brushed up.
It's good. It's a good podcast, though. Pod Save the World.
Thanks.
I do listen to it on the plane, and I doze off to it. Actually, usually, so I kind of have you and Ben Rhodes in my dreams, oftentimes.
That's nice.
When I'm on flights. So I appreciate you,
Dear Diary.
Thanks for coming back to the podcast. Do you have anything else you want to promote? Any other final thoughts for everybody?
No. Let's just let's come together, Libs. We can do this. We're gonna make it through this 2 years. I get into some doomer places, like I know you do, Tim.
Yeah.
Usually around 10 p.m. at night on Sundays, and we got to pull up.
No Sunday Scaries with Tommy Vietor. Guys, we're going to be back here tomorrow with Andrew Weissman. Look forward to seeing y'all then. Peace.